Welcome to Nailed It, a podcast featuring business tips from industry leaders, presented by Clever Punch. Here's your host, Jade.
All right, on today's episode of Nailed It, business tips from industry experts, we're excited to welcome Matt Wier, a seasoned photographer with over 15 years of experience in interiors, architecture, and hospitality. He's based in Southern California, and Matt's journey began in the rural suburbs of Philadelphia, where the natural beauty of his surroundings sparked his passion for photography. After earning his BFA from Brooks Institute, he honed his skills working alongside top hospitality photographers on shoots for luxury brands worldwide. Today, Matt's portfolio boasts collaborations with renowned designers, builders, and architects, and he's known for blending creativity, technical precision, and thoughtful collaboration to deliver stunning, impactful images. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hi, Jade. Thanks for having me.
Today, we are going to be discussing the art of architectural photography, which of course, a lot of our friends in these industries will be interested in learning. And we're going to talk about what goes into a successful shoot. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights. But first, I'd love to hear what you think makes architectural photography different from other shoots.
Well, the most obvious one, obviously, is that you can't move your subject, and it does not move. It doesn't talk back to you, and you can't tell it anything. And those are both great things and challenging things. So obviously, if you're shooting portraits, there's an interaction that you're having with your subject, and shooting an architecture, an interior piece, you interact with it just in a completely different way.
Interesting. How would you say you interact with it?
You interact with it by moving around it. Looking at it in all sorts of different ways. Staging and styling are a big part of it. You interact with it that way. You interact with it by watching how it changes through the day and how the light changes on it. Just to clarify one thing, when we talk about shooting architecture, I think we can include, we're shooting architecture, which might mean exteriors and interiors of a building. We could just be shooting interiors for a designer, and that can include things like a wide photo of a room or a close-up detail vignette, or like a little moment of a chair with a throw on it or something like that. So all of these kind of fall into the realm of what I consider architecture and interiors. But yeah, they're different that way. The subject doesn't move; it doesn't change unless you restyle it or do something intentionally with it.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned the different styles or what you could be capturing, because for me, this falls into why you might be shooting architecture. It could be for an architect for their project. It could be an interior designer for their completed project. It could be for a general contractor for their project. It could be a real estate agent for a listing that they have. So all of those examples, I think, fall into our conversation today. So speaking of those clients that we have in mind, if they have the need for a photo shoot, they need to capture a project for any of those reasons to add to their portfolio or maybe for a listing, what are some ideas that you have that could help the shoot be more successful? What can the client do first before hiring you that can make the shoot more successful?
The number one thing you can do to have a successful shoot is to have a plan in mind. And when I say that, the number one thing that comes to mind is a shot list. Know what you want to shoot. Know what are the most important features of your project. Know what you want to show off. Communicate that to your photographer so they know. Another important thing is, what do you want these images to look like? Because, each photographer has their own style, but within that style, a photographer can capture things in different ways. And a good photographer can take their client's input and, implement that into how they shoot. A good way to do that is to just take some images that you like, whether they're from that photographer or just something you saw online, and say, I like this, this, and this, and share that with them. That can convey things like the overall look or tone of the photos, if you want them kind of brighter and lighter, or perhaps a bit darker and with more sharp, harsh contrast. And the best way to do that, I think, would be to go through your photographer's portfolio, find images that you really like that they took, and even more so, find images that perhaps kind of look like your project that you're looking to photograph, and share those and say, these are the ones that I really like. Let's make our images look like this.
Mm-hmm. So start with a shot list. And if you have example images that you're after, that style that you're after, then share those too. What are your thoughts on how many images that a client wants to end up with? Is that part of the early on conversations?
Yeah, that is definitely something that should be discussed. That will tie into the billing of the project. That'll tie into how much time the photographer wants to have for the project. It can help influence a plan for your shoot day. Yeah, that's a good thing to talk about. I don't like to get too hung up on a specific number. It's more of, I want to make sure we get 3 really good establishing hero photos of this space, and let's get some details alongside of that. That can help me kind of in my head, think, okay, well, we'll get, maybe 2 angles of this room and 1 of this one and, 2 of the other. And then, within those shots, there's, this little detail moment over here. And there's this other thing we wanted to capture. So yeah, that can just kind of help influence the pace of the day. And like I said, it also can go with billing, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But
is there anything that you like the client to do to get the space ready?
Yeah. So along with planning and having an idea of how many shots you want and what you want to shoot, props are really big, especially if you're shooting interiors. So have an idea of anything you might want to bring along. If you're a designer, you should have a really good idea of what's in, the house or whatever the project is that you've designed. And you will more than likely say, oh yeah, there's this, coffee table book in this other room. It would be great in this shot. So know what's there, know what, resources are already on site that you can utilize, but bring things in. Florals can be great. I always like to go kind of small and simple with that sort of thing. You typically don't need much to add, a little something to a shot. A lot of times it can just be about filling a space that perhaps looks a little empty or bare. So yeah, props can be really good.
And then what about, just to help level expectations, what do you feel like clients should know when it comes to editing images? Because I'm sure you run into that where there's a missed expectation of what can be edited, photoshopped out of a photo versus what needs to be fixed there in the moment. Is there any way to kind of give a guideline on that?
With retouching, I mean, almost anything can be accomplished these days, but obviously I always like to get things right in camera as best we can. Generally with our shooting architecture, retouching is a big part of the process. Even a really great top of the line camera can only capture so much detail between shadows and highlights, compared to what our eyes can see. And so lighting is a big part of that, but also retouching is as well. So for a wide interior shot, something like that can take up to an hour per image to retouch. And I think that's more time than expected than, what someone might have in mind. It's painstaking sometimes, and it's part of the process. I don't love sitting at a computer all day, but I do really love the process of retouching. It's kind of like painting in a way, taking these source images that you have and then creating the final result. So yeah, it's complicated. It can involve compositing several different images into one final shot. Most architecture and interior photographers will shoot on a tripod. They'll take a series of images, perhaps with and without lighting, to create one final result. And the process of putting those all together is, like I said, fun and time consuming. So if you have a big shoot where you have 20 wide interior shots that you're looking to put together, sometimes the retouching is as big of a part of the process as the photography.
It's good to remember. I think you're right that most people underestimate the work involved after to get an image like they have in mind. What are your thoughts on ideal time of day? In my experience, a lot of clients have got maybe a little bit hung up on they're disappointed if it's foggy, or they're disappointed if it's sunny, or they're really obsessed with golden hour. But what are your thoughts when it comes to planning time of day or weather around a shoot?
As far as the weather goes, it's all good to me. If you're good at what you do, you should be able to take any sort of weather situation and make it work for you. Now, that's not to say that, you can't get rained out if you're looking to shoot, a wide, architectural exterior or something like that. But oftentimes bad weather can result in some very interesting and unique photos, especially if you're talking about exteriors. As for interiors, I really like shooting interiors with foggy, cloudy weather. We get the marine layer all the time here, and it's great. You get really nice soft light inside. If you needed to add a little bit of light coming through a window or something like that, you can with light. A photographer's job is to, not just make use of the light that's there, but add or subtract light to make the final results. So especially, we live in Santa Barbara, and I've resigned myself to not complaining about the weather. I don't think we get to do that here. So,
yeah.
No, you just take it as it comes, or at least that's my philosophy on it. And if you get into a situation where you really did want some different weather, or you really wanted a specific result with a sunny day, if it looks like that's not going to happen ahead of time, you can talk to your photographer and try and rebook or figure something out. I try to be flexible with that sort of thing. But my vote is to usually go for it. I don't like to scrub because it looks like it's going to be foggy or anything like that.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the other aspects, like planning, being able to access the site and have the props and the styling and somebody there to help and, moving things around, those parts are a lot more vital to work with and get right than the weather. I'm curious, when it comes to shooting a home or a commercial space, what's the trickiest elements of a project? Because what comes to mind for me is fireplaces, but are there other ones that you can think of that are just so hard to get right?
From a technical aspect, sometimes it can be challenging if you have a really wide space, or perhaps, like open floor plan homes are, pretty popular right now. And it can be difficult to show the kitchen that goes into the living room, that goes into the entryway all in one shot. A photo is two-dimensional, and to show the breadth of that and all the detail that goes along with it, there's a way to do it, but it's always a challenge. Windows can be challenging just from a technical standpoint, but yeah, I would say the one thing that kind of gets me every once in a while is if you have a really wide space, I often find myself backing up and okay, let's include all of this and see. You get to a certain point backing up and going wide where it's like, well, I think we're seeing too much here, or, if we lost the sense of what we're trying to show by showing too much all at once. That can be challenging. Yeah, I'd say that's one.
Do you shoot video as well?
I shoot a little bit of video. I am not a full-on video production studio. That's such its own world in terms of equipment and editing. I can do some basic stuff and make it look really good. I don't edit video. That's a whole other realm. But most photographies these days, not only do their cameras have capabilities, but I think most people have some knowledge and perhaps some equipment or access to equipment that can help them shoot video.
And do you shoot drone footage as well?
Yeah, I do shoot drone footage, or stills from the drone. It's a great tool, and I just view it as that. It's another tool in the camera bag. I often like to shoot from a ladder more than the drone when I can, because I can use my main camera. And even though the technology on the drones has gotten really good and the cameras are decent, if I can just get up on a ladder and strap it to the ladder and shoot from that with that camera, I'll do that any day over the drone. But there's, you can't get a 200-foot tall ladder very easily. So yeah, the drone's a great tool, and I like.
Is it because on a ladder you just feel like the quality is so much better?
Yeah, the quality that you'll get from, or that most photographers will get from their primary camera, is going to be better than what the drone can do. The other challenge with the drone, as I mentioned, a photographer will often take multiple exposures with the camera on the tripod and layer them together. Even with the drone hovering perfectly stable, it's moving around a tiny bit. And so when you go to stack those layers on top of each other, they don't line up perfectly. And you can fix that to a certain extent. Yeah, it is a lot to do with image quality and also lens selection. I mean, the drone I have now has a couple of different lenses built into it, which is nice, but it's just not the same versatility or quality that, a professional regular camera will give you.
What are your thoughts on when a client wants to book a photographer and a videographer on the same day? Do you think that's a good way to do it? It's strategic, or is it too complicated?
I don't encounter that too often. I have on a few real estate shoots, and it's never a big deal. You just have to definitely let everyone know ahead of time. It's fine if something comes up last minute, but it's nice to know ahead of time so that you can kind of think about that when you're planning your day, and also communicate, between the photo and the video team. Like, I'm going to be here, and, how about you shoot this area and I'll shoot this spot next. And yeah, you don't want to be in each other's shots. I think it's a little harder for the video crew. They can't easily just retouch someone out or just wait for them to move and click that one last frame they need. So, yeah, like everything, communication is key in that regard. It's not a deal breaker by any means. It's fine to do, and just let everyone know ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure. What kind of equipment do you work with, or what do you like to bring on your shoots?
I bring it all on all my shoots. I shoot with Canon cameras. I also have a Fuji camera that's kind of like my walk around, like shoot some little details camera. But yeah, I'm Canon for the most part. And aside from that, it's all lighting. So I have a couple of different battery powered strobes that I use because they're real easy to walk around with, not dealing with cables. And then I have some more powerful strobes that plug into the wall and are really useful in certain situations. I've got a handful of grip equipment. I would say sometimes people ask me, like, if you could only have one or two pieces of equipment, what would you have? And the tripod is number one. And number two would either be like a reflector or a blackout curtain, because subtracting light with like a big black fabric cloth is often just as important as adding light, with a strobe or something like that. So yeah, I would say most important are those sorts of things. But yeah, it's what your brand you're using and all that. Those are much less important than, what you're able to do with them and how well you know them.
And how much time does it typically take you to move from shot to shot?
It depends on how detailed you want to be with staging. You can spend, particularly with like a hotel shoot, you'll spend 2 hours staging a hotel room sometimes. And that's with the camera in place. You have the angle chosen. That can take 30 minutes, between collaboration with the photographer and the client. And then most photographers will shoot with some sort of monitor or tethered to a laptop. And that really allows you to hone in and, look at each detail of the shot. And the time can really fly by when you're doing that. And sometimes it gets to a point of like diminishing returns. Maybe you've spent an hour setting up a shot and you're still like, well, should we have the lamp over here or 3 inches to the right? And it'll make a difference. But at a certain point, you kind of have to keep your schedule in mind and choose, how strongly you want to prioritize each shot. But, it can be anywhere from like 2 minutes for, oh, this looks really great right here, and let me just add this light and click, we got it, to, multiple hours for a really wide shot.
Yeah. Reason I asked that, I feel like in my experience, that's one of the most common, like, misaligned expectations that a client has, is they overly assume how much can be accomplished on a shoot. And even like in mid shoot, it'll be like, oh, why don't we just get this, real quick right here? Like, oh, you missed it. Oh, that was so cool. But it's like, in order to get the shot, like you said, it's like, how good do you want the shot to be? Because that is all going to play into how much time is set up with lighting equipment and just keeping everything perfectly.
And if you're the client in this situation, by client, I mean, if you're the designer or the one hiring the photographer, that can be a little bit up to you. You just have to talk with your photographer and realize, like, oh, if we just do this extra room real quick, well, that might take an hour. And you can always try and be efficient when you're doing those sorts of things. But sometimes, you don't want to spend that hour for a shot that you maybe just kind of wanted. And now that you're there, you're like, oh, let's do it. When perhaps that time could be better spent for the hero dusk shot that you wanted to spend a lot of time, setting up and getting perhaps like some exterior furniture lined up really nice. There's only so much time in the day. And when it gets dark, it's dark and you're kind of done at that point. Some shots will work once it's totally dark, but you need at least a little bit of ambient, twilight for most dusk shots and interiors as well. So you just have to, be thrifty with your time and choose what's most valuable to you.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said at the beginning. You have to have your priorities, and having that shot list and then prioritizing that shot list is going to help the day be more successful. What are your thoughts on having people or animals in your shoots?
I love throwing dogs in photos. I've got a lot of photos where I've like tried to get a dog to go like lay on the floor. And if you already have a photo set up, like meaning everything's staged how you want it, camera set up, hooked up, all that. The way that I shoot, it's pretty quick to add someone into a shot. It's a matter of, having them walk into the spot that you want them and clicking an additional frame or two. And you can typically pretty easily offer 2 different versions of that shot, one with someone and one without. So I'm all for it when it works. I don't like to force it. Sometimes you can get into a situation where it's like, oh, let's add someone here. And next thing you know, you've spent 30 minutes and it's like, well, actually, maybe the shot was better without them.
Yeah.
But when it works, I'm all for it. But again, it kind of goes back to just being, like thrifty with your time and making sure you're not burning it on something that you don't truly want.
Do you have much experience shooting pools?
Yeah, I've photographed a lot of pools. Like you mentioned, I assisted a hotel photographer for a long time, and I have a couple of hotel clients of my own now. And yeah, I love shooting pools. It kind of plays into, shooting architecture. You're not just shooting the subject, but you're shooting everything around it too. So if there's a pool next to a nice house, and that's part of what my client wants to capture, love to shoot a pool. One little trick I'll reveal is oftentimes if you've got your shot set up and you're kind of looking at it, if the pool water is completely still, try putting your hand in the pool and like stirring it up a little bit, and then watch as the waves like ripple around and make a little bit of texture on the water. Sometimes that can give you a look that you might prefer over just the completely glassy still water, especially at dusk. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, I stirred the water for that one.
I'm looking at Matt's portfolio while we're chatting.
Yeah, I'm looking at that shot. I'm seeing
these little tricks here, these ripples in the pool. That's very cool.
That was photographed in Montecito for Lynch construction, and a little bit of ripple in the pool there adds just a little bit of interest compared to the water being completely glassy. And the other fun thing that'll happen is if you're shooting a twilight shot with a pool, the reflections will be totally different with a little bit of like motion in the water versus completely still. Sometimes the still water is better. Sometimes a little texture is better, especially if your shutter speed is slow and that ripple kind of blurs. Yeah, love shooting pools. Why not?
That's cool. Do you ever shoot a project knowing that it's going to be used for editorial?
Yeah, that definitely happens. And we keep coming back.
How does that affect the shoot?
We keep coming back to the talk of like, know what you want when you start a shoot. And this is an example. Like if you knew that photos were going to be used for a particular editorial feature, yeah, I would take into account what that publication is, what sort of style of images they like to publish. I think sometimes with editorial, that's where you can, or at least for me, I'll try to shoot a little more variety and perhaps get a little less meticulous with the staging and the lighting. I think a lot of times magazines like to have options. Obviously, it depends on the publication. If you were shooting for like a really high-end magazine like Architectural Digest or something, they might have very specific things that they want from the images or portions of the project that they want captured. But also just communicate if there's a particular publication you want to be featured in, send them some phone photos of the project first and ask their thoughts on what they'd like to feature. It all kind of comes back to the pre-production side of things.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I wanted to ask your thoughts on what's realistic when it comes to a budget. Obviously, there's a wide range, and that is part of the early conversation of understanding what the client's goals are. But how would you answer that? What is realistic when it comes to a budget for shooting a project for architectural photography?
Yeah, there is a wide range, and there's a lot of factors that go into sort of dictating that. I would say just as a ballpark, most, I think, interior and architecture photographers are going to charge somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 a day. And that hinges on how many images you want, how well established that photographer is, what the intended usage of the photos are. Is there anyone else who wants to use the images as well? So with usage, most of the time, I think photographers will grant their clients usage to the images for what they need. That's how I work myself. So if someone approaches me and they want photos for their website, they want photos to be able to print in an advertisement, that's included with what your photography fee. Now, where it gets a little more complicated is if a nationally published magazine wants to use them. That is a conversation you should have with your photographer and just, get an idea for what they'll charge based on the usage of the images. There's also consideration if say you're not a designer, say you're, a furniture maker or something like that, how broadly those images will be used, if they'll be shared with anyone. For example, I worked on a shoot for Open Door. They're the real estate tech company, and they needed images used internationally. They wanted no one else to have the ability to use them. So it was a rights buyout. The rate for that was quite a bit more than it would be for a local interior designer or someone like that. Another big kind of question on usage is if you're a designer and you want to be able to submit your photos to magazines for publication, talk to your photographer and let them know what magazines you want to push to. A lot of smaller magazines don't have budget for photography or typically won't expect to pay for the images. So you should talk to your photographer. They might have an additional rate they add into that if you want the images to be freely publishable by other magazines. Another thing to add on to this is, say you're a designer and you worked with an architect closely on a project. Typically, what you can do is let your photographer know that ahead of time, and what they may offer is a shared rate. So that may be where the overall fee for the shoot is increased, but you can share it with the architect, making it more affordable for everyone involved. And I really like when that happens because it's also more hands on deck for a shoot. It's more resources available. Perhaps with the added, party involved, there might be an extra budget to add a stylist or something like that. So yeah, there's no one size fits all answer to that question, but generally expect to pay, I would say somewhere around $2,000 or more to photograph a project. And how much you'll be able to capture in that day just depends on photographer and how you want to work with
and
them.
A half day is not, would you say a half day is not very realistic? You really need to be looking at a full day.
Some photographers, I think, will do a half day. It depends on what you want to capture. I'll occasionally do half days, especially if it's someone I work with regularly and I really do know that it's just a quick thing they want to capture. So it just depends on the photographer. I'm okay with it if it's a realistic expectation of what we'll be able to get in the day.
Yeah. What comes to mind when you think of like some of your biggest accomplishments with where you've seen your photos end up? Is there anything that comes to mind that was like a placement where you just felt like such a great milestone in your career?
Honestly, I've had my photos in a lot of different places, but I think what first comes to mind is when I was in high school and I had taken some pictures. There was like this local racing event in a parking lot of a mall, and it was a Porsche club thing. And like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia, and I had snapped some photos of this, like cars racing around an auto rally thing. And I sent the photos to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and my dad, like 2 days later, a coworker of his was like, "Look, this is your son's photo on the front of the sports section." I know that might sound a little silly, but that was like a really big deal. I would say it's still exciting to see my photos in print, like love to see them in print. And I would say the prestige of the publication means a little less to me now. It's just, I like to see them in print. But the one that really comes to mind is that like first one. It's like, oh, wow, there's my picture that I took. For
and I'm
a
sure
lot of people to see.
You to keep going in your career.
Yeah, that was exciting.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been great to hear your feedback and for us to learn a bit more about what contributes to a successful shoot and how it really comes down to communication and expectations aligned. It's lovely to look at your work and just an amazing portfolio that you have with, Unander Construction, Lynch Construction, Ritz-Carlton, Kirkwood Collection, just a beautiful portfolio that really shows off your skill and how great it is to work with you. The work speaks for itself, but obviously in getting to know you a little bit better too, it's nice to hear a little more about your style and what it's like to work with you. So thanks so much for the conversation.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Jade. And thanks for all the kind comments on my work. She's referring to this printed magazine portfolio I just put together. And if anyone would like a copy, please reach out and I can mail you one.
Perfect. We'll have your contact info in the show notes. So if anyone would like to get in touch with you to discuss working together or would like to see your portfolio, look in the show notes below. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jade.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Nailed It, business tips from industry leaders, brought to you by Clever Punch. Nailed It is all about connecting with people, building relationships, and helping each other. If you're interested in connecting with any of the guests on our episodes, you can find their contact info in our show notes or on the podcast page at cleverpunchco.com. You can also email info@cleverpunchco.com with any questions or feedback. I'm your host, Jade Flogersy. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.